You're listening to Extratextual, the show where we tell stories about movies while the movies tell our stories. Each episode will bring you a special guest who shares a personal story connected to a meaningful film in their life. Then we share some kind of connected story from our own film experiences. And as always, we learn something new about ourselves and others. Welcome to the show. This is Extratextual, and I'm Eli Steenledge, and with me is
Jeremy Holiday.
We've got an exciting show today because one of our most popular topics for this show is Stranger Things. We still get lots of downloads of our past conversations of season 1 and season 2. And so obviously people love hearing about this show, and we know it's popular, so we're bringing conversation about season 3 finally. And we're excited to have a special guest with us, Jason Waller, who is a former BBC reporter from across the pond. So he's bringing his perspective on things from not growing up in America, and we'll see if there's any differences or how you connect. We're glad to have you on the show.
Hello.
Welcome. So we are going to kind of jump right into things and talk about season 3. I think this will be a little bit different conversation from what we've been talking about off the show of what we think of it. So I think it will be fun to kind of break that down. And I think everybody's interested in where this show is going, if we're going to continue to love it as much as we did in the past, all of those great things.
Can I just say, you didn't tell me about that being so popular, the season 1, season 2 episodes that you brought me in for the hate mail, haven't you?
Yeah. People loved hearing great things about the show, but don't say anything bad about it. Yeah, we can't talk about that. No, we can say whatever we want. So I think let's talk about our experiences watching this season 3, because I think it's usually the traditional binge watch for me, especially this show. Not all shows that I watch, but this one I usually have to watch. And I have to say, I have rewatched Stranger Things, and I hardly ever rewatch TV shows. But I have been interested to go back and see them. So for you guys, how was your experience of watching season 3 at least?
Well, my general strategy is I like to watch the first episode, particularly like the first 20 minutes, to see if like I'm going to be into it or not. And I did that
of any show.
Of any show,
yeah.
You know, because then I'm like,
gotcha.
Do I need to plan off a weekend?
How much is going to suck me in? Yeah.
I watched the beginning of this. I watched the whole first episode. Watched it with my wife because we'd watched the first 2 together, and I was mildly interested. My wife was not. I then watched it, sort of piecemeal over the next couple weeks. It felt a little more like a chore than a treat. But I kept with it because it's a show that I like, it's characters that I like, and I kept hoping for them to turn a corner. And having finished season 3, I am excited that they're gonna come back with a better season 4.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah, how about you, Jason?
I have a similar experience. My wife and I watched the first 2 seasons together. We binge watched it to almost detriment. There were several nights where we would have went past, it was a school night, but it was past midnight. And this time, I think Erin lasted 1 episode. And also it had taken us about 3 or 4 weeks past I think was it released July 4th?
It was around then, I think.
And lots of colleagues at work were talking about it. I got one guy we had watched it together, even though not physically. We'd watched it, and we had deconstructed it at work. After our binge sessions, and he kept coming, have you seen it? I was like, no, I've not. And I think I don't know what it was. I think there was some apprehension of, is it going to be as good as the first 2? And lo and behold, rats were in it.
It's a sign.
Yeah, I think so.
Exploding rats.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Boiling, exploding rat guts.
Yeah, No, I mean it's not what your wife wants to see, apparently. No. And so how I ended up watching it was, which is I don't know, may be a little bit into my mental health, unfortunately. But sometimes I can't sleep in the middle of the night, so I'll watch things that my wife won't be watching. And I ended up watching it over a couple of weeks, sometimes 2 in a row, sometimes half. And so it was a bit fractured, but I think it was fractured because I don't know, I wasn't all that into it all the time.
I would say similar. It's interesting that, I mean, it is such a popular show, but sounds like we have all watched it with our wives, at least in the past. And these days, we actually don't find time to watch things together very often. My wife did stick with it, but I don't know how engaged she was. It would have been more like, let's sit down and watch this.
It might be good to say at this point that you do have probably the coolest wife, though, that in movie terms. She knows her stuff.
She knows her stuff. She did go to film school as well, so she is into that. Although lately she's not been into TV, but that's fine. She's a good storyteller and all of that. So yeah, she has good perspectives, and I think she was less into this season than other ones to pull her in. But I think once we started it, we did watch it pretty quick. But I think it was not as quick that we did jump into it, like you said. We did wait a few weeks before we did. But it's weird with this show, especially, there is this cultural conversation going on about it. So I think that in some ways is sometimes the pressure on this is, like, people are talking about it now. I also don't want to hear things to spoil it, that usual. And especially this is so much in the culture about it. And I think I did hear, we heard someone was going to die. And by the way, we don't worry about spoilers on this, so we can talk about whatever.
Okay.
And so that did sort of ruin it, and we figured out pretty quickly who was at least allegedly going to die in this season. So we can talk more about the ending later. But I am curious, Jeremy and I have talked about how the characters, the setting, the pop culture especially is very nostalgic for us. That I think, however much we don't want to feel so strongly like Netflix is appealing to us in that way, that this is made for us, at least the first couple seasons, bringing all the things into it that we sort of loved in the 80s and in the 90s during that time. Whether it's, Goonies, Spielberg stuff, Stephen King horror, any of that stuff, Explorers, any of those sort of movies about these kids coming together as a group, I think were things that we related to a lot. But for you, Jason, coming from across the pond, did you have that same experience of nostalgia for this time period?
Totally, actually. Mainly from the movies of the 80s and early 90s. I think certainly for me, if I'm not speaking for the whole of the UK, and
you are.
I guess I am, apparently. But for me, my eyes were on the US. News, Reagan, love him or hate him, he was a movie star, literally a movie star president. You had Hollywood was just, it was amazing, right? And also during that time, my teenage life brought out the best teenage movies, I think, probably ever. Breakfast Club, Goonies, I don't know if E.T. is a teenage movie, but that kind of, all those kind of movies for children that were loved by adults as well. At that time, just, I don't know, watching them watching Stranger Things brought me back to watching other things. Which I think it did for a lot of Americans as well. Obviously, I didn't live in small town wherever, and suburbia was very different in the UK than the US. But at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, the end of Thatcher, it was quite a dark period in the UK. And looking across the pond was a nice, bright, shiny Hollywood. And it was amazing we all soaked ourselves into it on a Friday night. We got to the movies or rent a VHS copy of something. So there's definitely a lot of nostalgia from the movies and TV that I soaked up as a child and teenager.
Seeing the same things. How about like the experience of the actual characters? Because like you said, actually, Jeremy and I did grow up in very similar towns. You were saying that, and I think I did too. Where we would, we were hardly kept track of. I would just be like, hey, I'm going to see this friend. I'd hop on my bike, ride across town, and we'd be like, just have to call in a couple hours and be like, hey, I'm over here, and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Be home by 7:00 or whatever. And so I think that experience was very similar, and the sort of dorkiness of these characters, to be honest, I can relate to that, and I think that's for me a lot of what it's about is identify with too. And we've talked about this, like it was very much not popular to play D&D back then, and I actually didn't, but I did things like that. With my friends, but to find that you were sort of the outsiders in some ways culturally, but this show sort of redeems them in like they get to have these adventures where they essentially like save their town or save their friends, save the world or whatever from these things is what you sort of maybe viewed your group of friends could do if you wanted to. But did you relate in general to like the characters and their experiences?
Well, apparently my childhood was a little bit stricter than yours. My mother didn't let me off the leash and go off across town on my bike. But I mean, my childhood was, I always had a bike and I always had a ball in my hand.
Baseball, right?
A little bit bigger. And it's we call it a football, but we won't get into that. Okay. But yeah, we would always take a soccer ball wherever we went to the park, and it would be we'd put our sweaters down. We call it jumpers for goalposts.
Gotcha.
You put your sweaters down, and it was 45 aside, and it was always, whether it was 15-0 by almost the end of the game, it was always ended with next goal wins, right? So and then game was on, right? Then we started, right? And then it took about 30 minutes to score a goal, but that was with me and my friends, and me and my friends, there was 4 or 5 of us. We did have a little gang of ours, and we could have saved the world if we wanted to at any drop of a hat in our own minds.
Right. Exactly.
And we also had our gang we had some girls in our gang as well. So what Stranger Things gave visually gave me in my head, I think, a little bit of nostalgia that way as well. Yes, those 4 or 5 boys were my 4 or 5 boys, and you could see that the banter that they had with each other and the arguments, and then suddenly forgotten because they do have to save the world, and also that the chemistry between the boy and the girl, but also the friction between the boys when the other boy went off with the girl, and it was jealousy, but it was jealousy because it's not that they wanted the girl, they wanted the boy back in their gang, didn't they? And I felt that.
Yeah.
So I feel as though there was a lot of that childhood connection wherever you are in the world, whatever language it's translated in. If you've had a group of friends that you've had close knit growing up with, you definitely connect with those that gang in Stranger Things.
Yeah, I did think there was this balance in season 3 that I liked and disliked in different parts, where we did see just what you're talking about, where now a couple of them have girlfriends, and Will character is sort of left behind, and they sort of have this confrontation at one point, and they're like, what, did you think we were going to play D&D for the rest of our lives in your basement? Like there's other things.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did think that.
Yeah, I did think it. Yeah.
And so part of the, I'm going to be Mr. Complaining about all this. So part of like that moment, like out there framed with the rainy garage, was like almost perfect. But the thing was like those like that they're still like 13 at this point.
Yeah, they're pretty
we
young.
didn't have those conversations till we were like 22, right? And they're like, look, like you graduated from college. Like, did you really think that we're we're gonna open our own comic shop or whatever, right? And so I like the general arc of it. And it is like a really powerful moment for these characters, but it doesn't happen it didn't happen for us when it was 13. When we were 13, we were excited about playing D&D when we were 14. And we were 14, we were excited about getting jobs so we could buy our own stuff when we were 15. And it just kept going. The idea that like when they start to reckon with or turn the corner on like how their childhood is falling apart, like my experience of my group, that didn't happen until college. Right, and so it sort of I appreciated what they were doing with the moment, but I felt like it was out of place in the timeline of these.
I could say I had that experience like more towards the end of high school periods, or like 17, 16, where one of our group, like we were all like organized to go do something together. And by this time we could drive cars, so we like drove over to my friend's house, and he wasn't like responding a lot, and then we found out he was like with a girl. And it just like instantly kind of changed that dynamic of, like we want you to hang out with us, and his interest is shifting. And of course that was more important to him at the moment, was being with the girl. And we sort of, the rest of us didn't quite understand that dynamic yet. So I could relate to that, but I think there was other sort of awkward parts. I mean, a lot of the scenes at the mall between some of them were, definitely just be like, look, it's the 80s and we're shopping for 80s clothes. And that was
too forced for me.
Yeah, yep. Exactly.
And they did have to set it somewhere, and the mall 80s, was it the easy option? It might have been.
Yeah.
But this new there was a big deal made, wasn't there, about this new sparkly mall and taking over from the mom and pop shops and things like that. Yeah. But once you go inside a mall, wherever you are in the world, it's sterile, and it's shiny and it's polished, and it's difficult to get that culture or atmosphere going. So I'm sure it was. Obviously, the script writing's good, and they're trying to get as much chemistry going as well. Yeah. But rather than being kids and enjoying themselves, getting muddy or out in the open on the bikes, where their kind of energy is just free flowing, I don't know whether it was metaphorically felt stalted, but it certainly physically and visually felt stilted a little bit.
Part of my perspective on the mall was twofold. Number one, like my experience of the mall when I was a kid was that the malls I saw on like Saved by the Bell and these other teen TV shows were glorious. My mall was pathetic. It had a fountain, and it had a Slurpee and an American Outfitters and a Spencer's Gifts, and I never saw other kids there. I did sometimes see things that kids would buy at that mall that we would see at school, but it was never, in my experience, ever this like cool party, big hair atmosphere that I saw on the television show. So when in like Hawkins, like I especially like Will's family, like the difference between Mike's family and Will's family, that was like a huge part of where I grew up. There were like families that worked in the coal mines, there were families that were farmers, there were a few families that like owned car dealerships. So there was the guy who owned the insurance company, and like everyone knew who these like families that had 2-story houses and they lived in a little like addition kind of place. But when they go into the mall in Hawkins, it's like they step into a different universe where they're now on like a TV show that the kids in Hawkins would have watched, as opposed to an actual mall, which is like, it's like everyone thinks it's going to be great, but it's actually just a big empty space with a Kmart and a bunch of other things. And so it's
not what the creators were doing, though. They were creating that big, shiny, shiny mall for the viewer at the time. Because going back to your point about the 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds wouldn't have had those conversations. I think I had those conversations in my head. But it might be a British thing that we're not very direct. But I think I probably would have, whoa, what? I would have had them on my own, away from whoever. Then I would have got over it, and then we would have been best friends the following day. But also, I guess the writers, I feel as though I'm okay with that conversation happening there and then by two people who probably would never have that conversation, because they're having it for, the writers are writing it for me, who's a 35, 40-year-old watching 14-year-olds, but because nobody wants to really listen to what 14-year-olds are actually saying, right? Do they? I don't think so, at least. So I'm fine with that dialogue going on as it was, because I'm soaked into it. I mean, I am one of those kids when I was a kid, but they're writing it for me now. As an adult.
Yeah.
But
the aim is definitely at our age demographic.
but it's definitely, I agree with you, it's definitely a stretch. But I don't mind that license that the writers took.
The next thing I wanted to talk about is Billy, because Billy is a really big part of season 3. And there's just a tiny little unrelated thing that I want to say first before I get there, which is just this ridiculous claim that I am from Hawkins, Indiana, which I'm actually not. But like the town that I grew up in looked a lot like Hawkins. And the thing that I like that linked me most to this story initially was that I grew up in an old coal mining town in Pennsylvania. It's called Homer City. Probably talked about it a couple times. But one of the things that was true about it was there was a huge coal-fired power generating plant that was actually owned by the New York State Energy Grid and provided a great deal of energy to the state of New York and part to New York City. So that one of the things we were proud of when we were kids was that we were actually like number 13 on the Russian targets for nuclear missiles if they were going to disable infrastructure in the United States.
Take out the power. Yeah.
And one of the more haunting things about having this giant generating plant in your backyard is that it had huge smokestacks that you could see from anywhere in town. And like every 4 weeks or so at midnight, they would send air through the stacks to clear out the soot, and it would be like you could hear it for miles. Wow. It just sounded like a thunderous earthquake.
Yeah.
So there's this constant, like omnipresent, quasi-governmental giant megalopolis at the backside of the town. So the way in which they relate to the Hawkins lab was like totally hardwired into me when I watched the show. And so like the way the town and that the lab sort of worked together really meshed with like my experience of growing up in a place like that in a time like that. So I was like totally in, like it. I know some people have said, well, why do they have this strange lab in the backyard? And I'm like, it makes total sense to me.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And the Russians built like a bunker under your mall too, right?
No.
Not that he knows of.
Not that I.
You didn't spend much time.
They
at the mall.
had a code that was really useful for delivering boxes. Anyway, so Billy.
Jeremy's friends didn't save the world.
Yeah, we did not.
The town is gone.
So Billy, in the second season, so two things. Number one, like Billy's weird sexual thing was like absolutely like uninteresting to my wife.
She's not into Billy.
No, and like I always kind of cringe a little bit with him creepily creeping on all the moms. I don't know. It's one of those things. Maybe it did happen in the 80s or whatnot, but like that in my little town, like that kind of even innuendo would like. Everyone would find out about it, and that guy would be labeled as a creep really quickly.
Yeah.
But I do think that like part of what I liked about Billy is his younger sister Max, and he is in the grand story about masculinity is an interesting archetype in that he becomes tough when he's actually soft because of the way his father treats him. Or at least that's the way it's portrayed in the story, and I think I find it interesting, and I have sympathy for it, and I like it, and his hardness towards Max always pushes that line that he probably conceives of himself as taking care of her, but he's actually being rough on her because that's about the only way he knows how to take care of people. So I was excited about Billy being a character and having some kind of redemption arc in season 3. However, it was really important for me to say that our writers, like I was not Billy. Billy is not part of the party. He's not one of the protagonists of the story. He's an NPC. He's a non-player character in the grand campaign, but it doesn't mean that he can't go through things and go through arcs. But the fact that we focus on him so much, like we're in his body when he's going through all these transformations, it's disorienting to what I expect from the show, because I'm expecting to be almost always located in the members of the party.
Yeah.
So I like the subpoints about Billy are, number one, from a comedic standpoint, there has to be a scene where Steve and Dustin and Billy talk about hair care. Right? And it's like, and I mean, I'm going to write it for them. Like, Steve says something about like how he works really hard and has these products, and Dustin is like, yeah, I follow really hard and I have this thing. And Billy's like, I just get out of the shower every morning and I look like this, right? You know?
Yeah.
Because there's clearly bits about hair going on. Mm-hmm. The second part is I'm willing to be invested in Billy's redemption arc, because in my experience and in my life, it's like, having not been him but watched other people who are like him go through things, it's something that I would like to see it, because in my experience, people like Billy self-destruct or become really terrible. So I'm willing to let our authors redeem him, which they do in season 3. But my problem with it is that they get away from what makes him most interesting to me, which is his relationship to his family. And I think that Billy's redemption arc done properly is like some evil threatening Max that is somehow related to his father. He stands up to that, defends Max, cries and is soft to her, and throws off the toxic masculinity father that had been like forcing him to be this way his entire life. And if they were trying to embody that in the giant gut monster, they were not able to do it for me.
Right, yeah.
Because like, I mean, and this, I don't know, what I thought, I mean, they have zombies, right? So like, zombies are a great way to have people metaphorically work out relationships with evil people. His dad needed to be a zombie. He needed to cut his head off or something like that. Because as much as I liked a lot of what they did in form and in style, like the pieces that they used to signify the meaning were like crazy. Like, it was cool they fired fireworks, but like, that's a first draft, and you X that out, and you come up with something better.
It's a literal fireworks show,
right? Yeah. And like there was so much invested in what Billy was doing. I personally like Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood says like writing evil characters is easy, right? But writing good characters is really hard. And they just sort of like, Billy seemed like a character. They're just like, whatever. He's just a complete asshole. He's just terrible. And this evil thing is just like, there was not a lot of subtlety in the things that were going on. And and I think it took away from what could have been, I think, a really powerful story that stayed tight. Even though it had bigger things with Russians, it stayed tight.
So could it have been saved with the Billy character being a different one of the boys? Billy character was overtaken by, what did you call it? The big monster, right?
Yeah.
In Stranger Things 1, I forget the boy's name.
Will.
Will was taken over from, and we felt sorry for him, and but we only felt sorry. We didn't know him so well, because it was early on when it was overtaken, and there was that little bit of detachment from him. But you loved his family, and you wanted them to save him.
Loved his group of friends.
Yeah.
And,
Winona Ryder sells that because of how much she cares for Will.
Yes,
It
yes.
gets to buy in.
Yep.
So, if you'd have cared for the character even a little bit more, could that have driven the emotions a little bit more throughout the season? And if so, who?
Was a good. I mean,
because he was only introduced in the second season.
Yeah.
As a small role.
And he's exactly how you described him. It's kind of an unlovable, lovable rogue. He wasn't even a lovable rogue, was he? He's just. You want to slap him.
Yeah.
Part of it is like I feel like I knew, like when I was a kid, there were kids like there was like guys who were seniors at high school, like who drove cars and like they went to university, and or like there was a guy who raced motorcycles, like I would like things I would never do, and they like had sex with people, which is not something I really knew anything about in high school, and which I think that is who Billy is in this constellation of people. But they make him but none of those people in my world at least were like attempting to seduce people's moms. And I at least as far as I know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And they just seem to like that's a level of despicableness, and I maybe being nostalgic here, that is like something that you see in like modern television, like like that level of despicableness. But it just seemed out of place in the story. I'm happy with him being bad, and I'm happy with him being sexual, but like the way in which like sort of the crossover between him and like Mike's mom, I was like, this is it didn't seem to work for me.
They also did spend too much time on him in general. I think you're correct in that. Like,
it did. Do you say?
Yeah, it did. Yeah. I mean, they just went into like his transformation so much and all that, and it wasn't particularly interesting because we didn't have a lot of investment in who he was.
Right.
I mean, that could have just been happening in the
background. That's what I wonder
then.
If we'd have the investment that we'd had from series 1 and 2, would one of the other boys or one of the girls that have been taken over, would we have had more investment then in them saving her or him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you make someone like Mike, who's kind of the angriest of them, I mean, you know, like, because then you could have scenes where it's like, you know, people aren't sure if he's possessed or not. I mean, I think there's ways that can work with it.
Right, yeah.
And again, like I try to be as generous as I can in that, like, so if they set up the form where they want it to be Billy, which in D&D terms, he's an NPC, right? He's a non-player character. He's run by the DM. He's not run by any of the people there, and we can follow him on a journey. But we're focusing on our journey with him. Right, it's about how Max interacts with him and how the party interacts with him, and we just spend so much time at the pool, with him looking at people freaking out, not being himself. That
I think two things I want to mention. I mean, we found out some of the characters that they didn't develop in the past that became really weak in this season because they haven't developed them. Yeah. And I think some of the male characters, like Jonathan, who is sort of like the quiet, mysterious one in the first couple seasons, and this season is just kind of boring. I mean, I did like the element of sort of class that came up between him and Nancy. Like, he needs this job at the newspaper, and she's just kind of like, I don't know, I could quit, and like our family's gonna be fine. And I like that, but otherwise he's kind of boring. He doesn't really do anything else. And then I think Will doesn't have anything to do, and like you said, he's hardly in season 1 technically because he's just like gone. In season 2 he doesn't do very much, and now here he's just kind of there to be like a monster detector that pops up, right? When he feels the tingle, he says, oh, the monster's here. And so I think maybe Jonathan would have been an interesting character to have sort of go bad because you wouldn't suspect it in many ways. Have him just sort of, because he's not one of the younger crew, but
that would also draw Will into like saving him, I think.
Right, you care more about them. The other element that I wanted to bring up, and I think it goes back to a lot of the problems you guys are pointing out with this season, is that I think they thought of a bunch of fun elements that they wanted to do, whether they're nostalgic, they're 80s related, the mall. I think they wanted to make like an ickier creature sort of thing than we saw even in the other ones, to make that. They wanted this Terminator type character. They wanted Russians in general to bring in this sort of Cold War aspect. And so I think it felt like they thought of those ideas first, and then kind of like, how do we wedge these things into the story to make it fun and nostalgic, instead of starting with what story do we want to tell about these characters. Yeah, and I think that was a lot, because I want to know more about the Upside Down and this sort of threat coming from that. And it seems like the last 2 seasons have just been like, well, here's like a little more minor threat, sort of related to that world. Yeah. It's, this season it was just like, hey, something's left around.
So if we just take like one of like, I would say like one of the classic examples of dealing something like this, you take like almost any of like the classic Lovecraft tales, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of mystery. You're not sure what's going on. You get a glimpse behind the door. You encounter like terrible, depraved humanity. You encounter like evil demon sorts of things. and then there's a portal, and then you go to the other side, and you either are consumed by it or you're able to correct something and then make your way back, right? It's every classic hero's journey. Like, you have to go into the pit of death. You have to go into the pit of whatever it happens to be. You have to go to the heart of the labyrinth. And so my hope is, and that in the long arc of the show, they will go there. Yeah. You know, they will gather their sacred weapons, their best team members, their best cohesion, and they will willingly go into the scariest place, as all heroes do, to the heart of evil, and either trap it or sterilize it or something like that. And so speaking about the Upside Down, at the end of the second season, they're at a dance, and like the evil thing is looking over top of them, and like that divide was great. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, this is classic high stakes, low stakes, low stakes, high stakes, and it was great. But we start the third season like totally gone from that. It's totally like it doesn't. I mean, like, it was so cute to see them so worried about who was going to touch who where at the dance. Right, it was a return in some sense to the Shire, to the basic things in life. Right. You know, thinking that they had got away from it, but they didn't. And I wanted it. I wanted it to start from there, right? Yeah. And one of the things that I have always loved about, like, say you take Buffy, like there was always school, right? There was always school and outside of school. There was school and slang, regular life and slang. And I noticed that shows that like this, like there's almost no school in the third season. I know it's like taking place in the summer and that's an excuse for it, but there's a whole interesting world of their lives, which is school, which is not part of the story. And I miss it because it grounds them as being teenagers. It grounds them in terms of their story about things that I really identify with. And I don't know. I mean,
I do feel like most, I'm trying to think of some examples now and I can't, but most sequels that I think should start somewhere, start completely somewhere else. Yeah. And I think that actually is probably a good thing for the... Well, it's the writer messing with the viewer's head, right? Where are they going with this? What are they doing? Yeah. Why didn't they start at the dance? Well, because...
They haven't had their story to tell us about rats that explode in a giant pile of something.
I did appreciate, on a couple of levels, that they let Winona Ryder be more normal this season, though. Even though I appreciate the emotion she brought to the show in general, just like the first two seasons, she's been in like constant like manic worry mode to the extreme. And this season, she got to be a little lighter and funnier. And they kind of go on this adventure with Hopper and the car, and they're fighting, but like sort of flirting. And being sort of a nostalgic fan of Winona Ryder in general.
I'm very disappointed that she's grown up.
Right? I know, right?
I'm very disappointed she's not the teenage... young woman in the movie, because that means I'm getting old.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's really annoying.
Yeah. She's a couple kids.
I really loved the image of her. So I hated most things about the mall, and like the mall protests just seem ridiculous. Like I never heard of it. Like that's something that would happen now. But like in the 80s, like there were like that consciousness.
They didn't realize what was happening, did they?
We had no idea. Right? It was just good.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is not. You know, this is like 2011 and this is Walmart, like, please.
Yeah.
But I did love the way it provided this contrast for her to be like holding down the fort at the drugstore. Mm-hmm. That was an image that I just thought was fantastic. And even, you know, because like on two levels. One, it like seeing the shots out of the window with her. I mean, and I think they did it intentionally, like, because you miss Samwise being there with her. Which is part of her character in this, part of her character in this season, and I appreciated that. I was like, oh, like that, because that relationship was good, and it also like, again, like that is a person that I knew, like, you know, like they were in my small town, and they like worked this job maintaining the drugstore on Main Street when no one else really, when it was just all the other stores were run by like teenagers because nobody else could afford to pay real staff, and they worked for a low wage just so they could keep part of the town center alive, and that I really liked. And I also liked in form the way she was the one that kind of figured out the mystery. I think that was really terrible how it actually worked out, because it didn't really matter that it was a magnet. It all was just messy. But the idea of it, that she's the one sort of quietly observing that comes up with the solution, was something that I really liked. And it felt like I also felt like there's a part that she felt settled, where she was frantic before, and like things were going okay for Will and for Jonathan, and that made sort of her leaving at the end even more sad. And I thought that was the part that was really well done, that I liked. Because I mean, part of what I feel that was similar to Hawkins, to where I grew up, is like it was a town in decline. I mean, it was rusted before any of us were born, and we were just there to watch the. I mean, like my father was a coal miner, and there were coal miners, but they were the tail end of them. By the time I was a teenager, there were none left. And there were just these giant industrial monuments to coal mining that just got rustier and rustier and rustier every year, and we were just in a town that was, in perpetual autumn sliding to winter. And that is
Britain.
part...
Oh, you grew up in Britain, did you? Wow.
Yeah,
that's why we get along.
Yeah. And that was, and that's why, like, Jonathan is a character who seeks beauty in that, is a character that I always appreciate. I was also a photographer when I was young, so like I have deep connections with that character, about that place, the archetype and constellation of characters that go into that. But it was weird to square like the decline of Hawkins with this mall. Like, how is it so like? Where's the money that's going in to build this mall?
Where are the people to populate the mall?
Yeah,
like,
and I think I mean, like the way I can imagine it in my own world growing up is like further away, connected to a bigger town or something.
Yeah, that's the way it was. Because I actually had, well, I wouldn't say a similar mall experience, because it wasn't that hopping when I like there wasn't that many people just hanging out, but that was like a place we would go, and we had a nice mall, but it wasn't directly in our town. We had to travel a bit to get to it, but it was something we did enough that teenagers would congregate there, because you could sort of be free from adults inside somewhere. So it was that sort of setting, or even you could go with your parents but not be with them. You know what I mean? You could still go with your friends and have that space. But yeah, for a very small town like that, I don't think it was the same experience.
So it's changing topics a little bit, but I wanted to make sure we got to this comment that you made, Jason, when we were sort of warming up here, which was about, I was talking about, how the third season was disappointing, and you were saying, well, you asked us about Oasis, and you had talked about it as being like the third album.
It's a difficult third album, isn't it?
Yeah.
So my theory is, having just talked about it about 5 minutes ago, before we started recording this, the first two albums for Oasis, Definitely Maybe and What's the Story, Definitely Maybe was them getting outside of their bedroom, getting into the world. They had songs. Noel Gallagher had come back from touring with in Spiral Carpets, he was the roadie for them. He wasn't allowed to be their lead singer. He auditioned for them, so he came to his brother's band. I know too much about Oasis apparently. And they had a few songs, and they just started working on them. And I think they had a catalogue. The legend, at least, is that they had a catalogue of about 80 songs. And Noel Gallagher always said they were a 3-album band. Then they were going to do some psychedelic punk opera or something. Right? That's basically, looking back now, him saying, I haven't got a clue what we're doing after the third album, because all I've got is this list of songs. But that list of songs also went into a lot of their B-sides and singles, and their B-sides are an album in themselves, right? So they created 2 very, very, very good albums, in my opinion. In fact, I would say brilliant albums, in my opinion. And they also captured the zeitgeist at the time with them and other guitar bands. It was a kind of a rebellion against the grunge era for the UK, and it was the UK getting back to its own music style. And so they had their 2 albums, and they had glory, and it was great. And then their third album just died. It got 5 stars reviews because all the journalists were eating it up and thinking it was great, but it didn't get.
People didn't actually listen to it.
As soon as they bought it, I think it sold 5 million, but I've listened to it 3 times. I think Be Here Now, and so that creativity that had been in them for 23 years, that created the first 2 albums. Once they had toured the world, once they'd gone a little bit separate from the world that they were talking about. They were working class boys talking about working class dreams. They were living their dreams after the second album, and they did not know how to connect with their audience with it. So I don't know if the writers are like that, but we talked about it earlier, they have been they've been writing this Stranger Things probably for years. The first season probably had ideas as they were writing the first season for the second season, and they run out of ideas for Stranger Things 3.
But it's hard. So I mean, I think that like just the way that like you analyze the way Oasis like created music over the course of their early career, I think the same is true for folks that make television as well. I mean, and I think that in the age of dropping, I think like a Netflix series is much more akin to an album than it has been in the past.
Standard TV.
Right. I mean, because like, I mean, you know, like I don't know all about production and whatnot, but like when they were making Friends or other sorts of sort of episodic sitcoms, or even things like Quantum Leap that had, you know, threads that went through them, I don't think that they had the whole thing planned out when they started the season. I mean, the idea that you would have a 10 or 12 or 18 or 22 or 24 episode arc planned out at the beginning of a show was not something that was going on in the 90s. So I think that like there is a much higher demand to have a fully formed concept for each season, and whether that's like a 10 episode season or even like Castlevania, which I love the crap out of, is like a 4 episode season.
Right, sure.
But it's a concept and it's an arc, and I think that maybe it's true that you burn through ideas a lot faster. I mean, like season 1 is just chock full of all kinds of stuff, and even season 2, like there's complaints about that punk episode with Elle, but I think it's great, certainly because like my older brother was into punk. Like there was this like American fascination with punk that didn't quite go all the way to punk, but was like used that as an aesthetic that where we came from. Yeah. People listened to industrial music, and they were goths, but they weren't quite, you know, like not the Marilyn Manson goths, but like the Ministry, Skinny Puppy, Big Black, those kinds of folks, right? And so I think that I
thought they all listened to The Cure.
But it served the story more.
Only the happy ones.
But the first 2 seasons serve the characters and the story better.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, like the third season is like we've got lots of ideas, but it's just going to be
I just kept thinking about all those jokes that were made in season 3 of Dear White People, like it's like a third, you know, like a third season of a Netflix show. What I think is like the line I'll use is from The Hobbit, when like Bilbo describes himself as butter spread over too much bread. I think that there's I say this about a lot of stuff.
The binge writing as we're binge watching.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the classic Lost problem, which you haven't watched Lost, but the writers have admitted now, like it was so popular, and that was still in the traditional like 22 episode seasons. And the studio and stuff was just like, keep cranking them out, like keep it going as many. And they were like, well, we don't really know where we're going. Like we need to know when this show is going to end. Like we need to know how many seasons so we can hit that end point and make it. And so they admit like the middle, like the 3rd season, the 4th season are like stalling. Like they're trying to like put stuff out there until they can be finally told them like, oh, you're going to do 6 seasons.
And most seasons. Not long running shows do tend to have a muddy middle, a difficult 5th, 6th, 7th season, don't they? I mean, that is dare I say, sort of an American thing, because
too many episodes,
the British quite famously don't produce enough or as much as what people want. The original Office is it 6 episodes, first season, 6 episodes, second, and a Christmas special. I'll go back to the 70s and 80s of John Cleese's post Monty Python, Fawlty Towers. It's repeated on the BBC constantly. Everyone thinks there's thousands of them. There's only 12, right?
I remember watching all of Flying Circus when it was on Netflix and like loving it. And then my brother, who had talked about Fawlty Towers, I watched it and I was like, "Oh, where's the other seasons?" And he's like, "No, that's it.
Yeah,
You've seen them all."
That makes sense. I was always confused when I was young about British shows because I was like, I don't know how many. Also, we didn't get them in the exact seasons here in America.
Right, yeah.
You did, but I was like, I don't know how many.
I mean, the British TV is different to the commercial American TV, especially with the BBC. The BBC doesn't need to elongate everything and make all the money from it all, and it gives until people just want that little bit more and then stops.
Yeah.
Which I actually love because it doesn't mean... I don't know, yeah, I do love it.
I mean, I think it has functioned in contrasting some of my favorite BBC shows with some of my favorite American shows. They're far more condensed. Even like thinking of like when Mark Gatiss and what's his name did Sherlock. I mean, first season was 4 episodes.
Yeah,
and they were fantastic. First one, I mean, like
seasons in general. I think were only 3 episodes.
Yeah.
From there, yeah. I mean, it gets to like concentrate their
and
creative
so
juices,
I guess
right?
what I like. There's 2 things I want to say. The first one is one thing that was surprising to me about the 3rd season was I thought the actual production values were better than the 2nd. There were a number of things, particularly in the 1st and 2nd episode of the 2nd season, that you could see editing mistakes, or I mean, like things were a bit off. Like it was thrown together a little bit,
rushed, yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, like rushed, right? But with the 3rd season, none of that. Like totally polished all the way through. The second point is just imagine a different world in which they took a year and a half to make season 3. I think it would have been very different. And because like, I mean, I know that there's this like insatiable demand to have something and make money and for Netflix to enforce their brand and to have some sort of competitive advantage over the others. But from an artistic standpoint, I sometimes regret that they had to make this one now, right? Because I think probably if they had another 2, 3, 5 years to think about it, season 3 would be better.
I mean, that's my worry for 4th season, which we've had some sort of teaser, right, with Hopper in it, which makes me think it's coming out this year already.
Yeah.
Within the year. So,
listeners, I'm sorry, but you should see Jeremy's face. The disgust. I can feel it here across the table.
That's right.
But actually, you were talking earlier about Hopper and the Upside Down and that. Has he escaped to the Upside Down, and he's now that there might be that entryway into the better season. We might have only got 1 season to kind of get over before we get a real classic for season 4 potentially. I mean, all of us around this table were hoping that would be season 3, obviously, right? But you can only hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a few hint of things that we'll throw out. I've heard somebody point out in this last letter to Elle, there's sort of this wording that sounds a lot like he's sort of trapped in the Upside Down. He talks about being in a cave and hopefully I'll come out of this or you'll come save me. I think we do get some challenges to what we think because Elle's lost her powers, right? So maybe she'll have to go on a journey to get those powers back or to rediscover herself and some of that stuff. And also we talked about, which is both sort of awkward and some people have pointed out it might hint at something that there's almost like the ending goes back twice in the timing. Like they're leaving to move and they get in the car and go and then it like comes back again to her. Is that when she's reading the letter?
Yeah.
And then they sort of like say goodbye again. And so it's kind of like a weird editing.
Yeah, right.
But there's also, people point out there's a lot of references to Back to the Future in this season. Like I think it's playing at the theater. Or do they actually go watch it? I can't remember. At least it's playing at the theater. And so some people are hinting maybe this has to do with time travel. And so we may discover that's why there's kind of these like 2 disjointed things that happen, like they leave twice because maybe they have to redo some of the stuff. So I've heard a lot of people talk about time travel in the next season. So I don't know if that's something I necessarily feel like they needed to add an element. Like they have enough going on, weird stuff, but I think it could get interesting.
So what, they would go back to the 80s?
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like that would be I thought the natural place, but also if I've thought of it, it's too easy.
Yeah. That would be like the 7th season, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, now it's technically the 90s, but we need to go back to the 80s for nostalgia, right? To be able to make it popular.
I'm just going to plant my flag in. I hope that there's not time travel involved. There's only... Yeah. I think that there are plenty of ways to have fantastical, really cool conflicts and stories that don't involve things which require me to like suspend rudimentary common sense in order to do. Time travel is super cool, and I think it's really interesting to play with. But I think that you already have... So I think... So classify things, right? Heaven... multiple dimensions, and time travel. They are all essentially physical places or ideas that individuals conceive of or think about when you don't think you can achieve success in this particular world, right? This world is too terrible, so you think of heaven. This timeline is doomed, so you need to jump to another alternate reality and do it. Same with time travel. Like, we've already messed it up. We need to go back and fix it. And there are other ways to tell that kind of story and that kind of overwhelmed desperation with things that doesn't involve time travel. Because there are a couple good time travel stories that I like, but I generally find that I just have to believe someone's conception of how that is going to work in order for me to get what we're going to get at, and I don't want to do that. And I think there's enough cool stuff in this world. What about all those other people that Elle left behind in the Punk episode?
Right.
Like, if she doesn't have powers and she needs to go save Hopper, get the Scoobies together and fucking go to Russia.
Yeah, and it's a little becoming like X-Men-y.
Yeah.
With these different powers
these young
people have, and they might have to gather together to fight this evil thing, which is cool. And one thing I did want to bring up is the which we haven't really talked about, the group of like Steve and Dustin, and we meet Robin, and what's the little sister's name?
Erica,
that helps them out, and
even though I said Erica, I thought she was the star of this season. She was. Yeah, the breakout. She was. Yeah. She was the person who said everything that you wanted others to say, or you wanted you to be as cool to say yourself, sort of thing. And she was just not afraid of anyone, was she? And she was the youngest, right? Maybe the symbolism in that, but I loved her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does sort of act as that way of kind of breaking down what we, like you said, what we're thinking and how we view these characters, and they're like, hey, you guys are kind of being idiots or whatever, we just need to take care of business.
And she also comes out of nowhere, which is part of what the true joy of a character like that is. I mean, she's around.
She's Lucas's sister, isn't she?
Yeah.
And then she suddenly comes into the ice cream store, right? And then suddenly she's part of the gang, or she's part of the literal gang.
And I guess maybe she
against
grew
the
up
Russians.
A little bit, since we saw her before, so she's a little more involved.
Do you remember her from before? I don't, actually. I don't. I'll be honest.
I do. They just have like small things of like she stole a toy,
Okay.
He yelled at her, as the sister.
Is in the second season where she's supposed to relay like a message through the radio, or is that in the third?
That could be. I don't know if she's quite that involved in the second season. Okay. I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
There's one thing that I can't get out of the third season without saying, and it is this. So one of the things that I loved. So we just take one thing I loved about the first season was like there's this evil thing that nobody can fight. Like they don't know how to. They shoot with bullets, it doesn't die, and there's theoretically one person who could possibly defeat it. And the story is really tight. And they sort of narrowly escape death a few times through a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of luck. They had that friend at the pool who didn't escape and ended up dying, and it felt like the stakes were nice and solid. In the third season, there were so many times when, I think I was talking with Jason about it, the Russians became stormtroopers, where like they have like machine guns and they're 10 feet away and they are unable to hit anything. They're trained Russian killers. And I think there was once, maybe twice, where our group of heroes escape by like outrunning this giant 4-story pile of guts in a station wagon, by inches. And I just, in the first season, it felt like, and even the second, almost all the times that they avoid dying, it's well thought out and there's a reason why. In the third season, it just seems to be luck over and over and over again, and really ridiculous luck.
And they keep using Elle the same way in this season. Like, they don't advance that. They're always sort of like, oh, she's too tired to use her powers, but she does and holds it off. And then that's just like continuously what happens. She just uses the same powers every time they confront that creature. And even into the end. So, I mean, I guess eventually they take away her powers going into the fourth season, but we didn't learn anything new about her in that way to be able to do it. And you're right, like, they're in this confined space, at least when they're, like, in the underground bunker, and these kids can still kind of run wherever they want to and get away.
Yeah.
But I overall, I did sort of enjoy that adventure that group went on. Where they sort of like haphazardly fell into this adventure. Going deep into that.
I also have to register this other complaint, and I know I'm being Mr. Negative over here, but like the never-ending story musical montage.
I liked it.
I did.
Eli did too.
I mean, you made the point.
It's the only redeeming part of the. That was the end, right? Yeah. And. You've just not got a romantic bone in your body, have you?
I mean, I get you.
I
made
love
the point
musicals.
That it was mostly for nostalgic sake that they were using the reference. You know, like there wasn't a lot of story reason to include it in there, but I think it still worked enough, and it sort of like does sort of encapsulate what these characters are into and what they're sort of striving for is like this fantasy they sort of create in their head together as a group, playing D&D together or whatever, and then like facing the reality of that sort of breaking down in this season, I think, what they see. But Jeremy's holding something back.
Like, again, trying to rehabilitate as much as possible. I like the idea that like we're confirming Dustin's girlfriend at the same time as we're like saving the world from the Russian nuclear thing, and there's science and nerdery and all that kinds of stuff. Like it's just it made it, because like that happens, and it happens around the same time when they're fighting the big demon or the big beast in the mall, which is like, I'm supposed to take Billy dying seriously, and here and they have like the little cutaway little windows. I was okay with it being part of it, but I wanted to
that moment.
I was just too. I was like, people are with the other two seasons. When you got to the final part at the end, it was serious. Like Bob dies and it's sad. You know, like they finally are able to get Will back, right? And it starts off, both season 1 and season 2 start off with, we're having a good time. There's a dark omen. We deal with what is brought up by that dark omen, and then we return like through seriousness to this world. And it was just too silly. And it was like, I am watching like a show that is put together through the most popular 15 hashtags of the people that like the first 2 seasons. And I love the never-ending story. Right. I mean, like, I just love it.
So would you have had a different song that would have been like Flash Gordon?
No, if I would have done it, like
different moments,
Dustin would have been serious and she would have been playful, and he would have somehow convinced her of the seriousness of it. He would have totally sung the song and we would have gotten it, but they would have connected to the seriousness of what they're doing, which because the minute that happens, there are no real threats, right? If you're gonna stop for 2 minutes and some odd seconds and sing a song, there's not really a threat. And part of this, because of how I've been reading the rest of it, I really needed to be actually nervous about something bad happening, because currently, like, you cannot be shot by Russian bullets. You cannot be killed by a giant 5-story, 6-story, 7-story, shambling massive human and rat guts. There's got to be something like is actually going to happen. And the first 2 seasons felt that way. You know, maybe they weren't going to die, but something was going to happen. And I still I like the end of the second season with Elle like closing the rift and like, you know, Hopper like shotgunning demon things. That was great, man. I mean, and it was totally like ridiculous 80s movie poster.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it was
Predator,
also like I also cry a little bit because it's
emotional.
like because there is such this like they're
The
working
bond
as a
between
team.
those two.
Yeah. So I that's like, you know, if I were in that writing room, I'm like, okay, I like your idea. You know, it's got to be the lover's secret song. I get that. But we also like have to somehow make whatever the hell it is they're trying to disable over here still a threat. And you know, and also like it's a, you know, I thought there was going to be a moment when like Dustin gets to kind of grow up a little bit, because the idea the dynamic that I loved of him coming back to the group, having been at camp all summer and having had a girlfriend, like he was at the bottom of the pile and now he's at the top, but they keep pushing him down. So this is the moment where he like shows that he actually has all this other stuff. And I think that's what they were going for too. But
Didn't quite
breaking
come
into
across.
song a la 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 Land in a show that is not a musical was a bridge too far.
But in tune with Dustin's character. Because he's always
Yeah.
going to let himself down, really.
Fair enough. True.
I don't know.
Yeah. What do you guys think of the new Robin character who works with Steve, which happens to be Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman's daughter?
Oh.
Really?
She looks like both of them.
Okay.
Yeah, right? She's like a perfect combination of those two. Because I thought she was pretty good.
I liked her a lot.
Lieutenant,
I
yeah.
liked the chemistry between those two.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the end of the storyline as well, where she ended up being gay and he was heartbroken. Unrequited love. We've all had that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought she was a very strong. She was a strong character, strong female character as well. I don't know. I was going to say it's funny that, but I don't know if it's funny. You got Robin and Erica being with one of the stars of season 2, and those two both outshone him.
Yeah, kind of stole the scenes.
Yeah.
I agree. I like the scene where he sort of finally comes to understanding of like, oh, I can like this sort of geeky girl because we sort of have this connection. I can kind of leave this this masculine idea of who I am behind, and then we get this twist of, well, actually, she's not interested in him, is what we thought was going to happen. So I did appreciate that. He still has growth through that, but you're right. He's sort of heartbroken, and I think that adds to it. And we get this interesting character twist on what we expected to happen.
And a bit like myself, I like the fact that I don't like this, but I like that he was not as cool. He was way cooler in his own head than he was to the outside world.
Yeah.
And I liked that. I like that in a character. You don't often see that. I'm cool. I'm the greatest. I'm funny, and then completely dying, no laughter,
and so I mean,
everyone's shouting back at him, but him still getting up and giving it another go, but then actually realizing in the end, I'm not as cool as
I mean, one of the things that immediately connected with me about that is like one of the most popular guys in my high school. He took over as like the second string quarterback. His mom was a teacher. They live right down the road. His older brother was super cool. After I came back to my hometown, like 3 years after graduating high school, and like he was working at the local deli. And they make, this is Sanso's, they make fantastic Italian stuff. I mean, and I'm not joking. Like, it is literally worth the drive to my hometown to have.
When are we going?
Sanso's hot Italian stuff. And I don't know, like, they're amazing. Like, my brother would drive back from Baltimore and like buy like 4 of them just to take back. They're amazing. But I mean, they're really that good. But so the character of like, but in school, like, he was the coolest thing. Smart and funny, and everyone thought he was gonna like just do everything. But outside of that little world, not much.
Well, he's the guy whose school is the best time of his life.
Yeah.
and you've got 60 more years of life.
Yeah. I mean, I think I could relate to him in that sense, and maybe that's like, you know, dreaming of like sort of the payback for guys like that than in high school. But yeah, I think I could see that reality in high school of what that was going to be like. High school is not the whole world. This is not going to be life. And for seeing those people who felt like it was at the time and then waiting for be like, just wait. Yeah. And then they're the ones that, like you said, sort of hung around and were still there. And not to say like they didn't change over the years or whatever, but I actually could see happening. Yeah.
I really appreciated that he had growth and the show was gentle with him, because I didn't have any ill will towards, because like by the time I was in my 20s, I didn't have ill will about all the stuff that went on in high school anymore. I had sort of moved beyond it, and it was I don't know. I like that. I was compassionate at that point, even at that point, recognizing that like all of us wanted to get out of that tiny town, you know. And so I like that his arc and the writers of the show were kind with him, and that they provided growth for him to move, to realize like from, you know, he was the coolest thing around to like, he's gonna try to work to get into school. I just like one of the like stories, one of the stories from my hometown that I was tragic when I was a kid is like, there's a guy named Chris who lived at the end of my road, and he was an older brother to like my two best friends. And he was like, he was going to go make something in the world. And he got a job, and he got himself like a fancy car. I mean, fancy from where he come from. It was like, it was black, and it was like not more than 3 years old. And it had racing stripes and a spoiler, and he got a radar detector. We would literally just go look at it. Right. And I don't know where I think he worked at the mall, or he worked, you know, like somewhere in the university town over. And he only had it for like 3 months maybe, because he's not going to die. Don't worry. Right. But he was like, you know, in the next city over, like at 11 o'clock at night. And some guy pulls up behind him and revs his engine. And like, this is the moment he's been waiting for his entire life. He's going to drag race this guy. And they drag race, and the guy goes to 65 and then pops on his light because he's a cop. And he pulled him over, and since he was a young driver and his mom had been divorced, like his insurance company's like they discontinued his insurance on his car. He couldn't own a car anymore. He had to sell that car. And he ended up like having to get rides from his friend to go to work, when like a few weeks earlier he was like literally the envy of the entire town.
Wow.
That's your comeuppance, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and he like, we loved him. I just there's a way in which like, I guess what I'm trying to get at, if I can articulate it, is we, as much as we wanted Steve to realize that he wasn't all that, he was also ours, and we also did want him to succeed beyond the bounds of school or our community.
Well, he showed his insecurities that you don't see from the guy who's driving the car, right? Which was really quite a cool thing. Yeah. It was quite a cool thing for the that's a positive from the third season, absolutely.
So as we sort of wrap up, are you guys still excited to see where Stranger Things go? Are you going to be a little more hesitant going into the next ones and just kind of see what happens? Are you still like, I'm all in, see where the show goes?
Hopper's alive and he's buff. So
that's true.
I'm in. I'm all in.
Yeah. I mean, Hopper's a big part of the show. They couldn't get rid of him, I think. But
yeah, I mean, I also like, I'm not like, he disappeared and we mourned him, but I'm like, it's science fiction. We didn't see him die. Like, right. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, my hope. So here's a hope. My hope is that in like our very connected, responsive world, which both requires someone to put together an entire season in like a year, they will also be able to, like the phrase I use is like, look at their own footsteps. It comes from a book called Born to Run. It's about like tracking people for hunting. But if they're able to look at the show and hopefully listen to some feedback from their friends or the people that they sort of look to for advice and say, okay, maybe we stepped a bit too heavy or fast in a couple areas. There are some really great parts of what we're doing. Let's focus on those going forward. I am excited. I mean, I'm excited anyway. The thing that I this is what I hope, sincerely, very clearly, that it does not go the way of The Walking Dead. I think the first 2, maybe 3 seasons of The Walking Dead were absolutely fantastic. I mean, and Frank Darabont put together a feeling in those, certainly in those first 2 seasons, that I've never been matched. Nothing else has scared me or made me feel unnerved. And I would just weep openly in that show, identifying with the challenges that Rick is perpetually going through. The show goes so long and they go so many different places that they lose me many, many, many times over along the way. And it goes, I mean, it's still going on, and I could give a shit, right? My hope is that, especially with a concept and a series of ideas as interesting as what they have in Stranger Things, they will take stock. I would rather see it be a little more, I regret this, a little more repetitive than innovative. Because I think that there is a value in our characters coming back to certain challenges at different points in their life. I would really like Elle to be in a place again where she has to determine whether or not she's going to use her powers to kill. I want her to reckon with that choice again, and come back to it. I think that there's room for that to sort of cycle back, and I'd rather see that more than let's go to an interesting locale, let's do it underwater, let's do it in time travel, let's do it in space, let's do it with bubbles, whatever that thing happens to be. I want to see these characters grow up and deal with the progressive challenges as they go along.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, they should do 2 more seasons, 4 and 5, and then probably end it, wrap it up nicely. And I think that would give us time to develop what is going to be the big thing that they're going to face, setting it up in season 4, season 5, then not push it too long. I think part of the problem will be, if you think Netflix, it's Stranger Things in a lot of ways. And so they may want to hold on to this property and push it as far as they can, and it may bump up against that. So hopefully, as storytellers, they can fight for, let's tell a cohesive, good story and not drag it out.
And you say about the Netflix Stranger Things. Stranger Things was Netflix's first massive original, wasn't it, right? So this is the blueprint for Netflix.
What they're going to do, yeah.
They haven't gone so far into many seasons before. Thankfully, from a British point of view, they haven't done the 24 episodes in one season, and they've kept them short and kind of leaving the audience wanting more. But I do wonder, Netflix, I think originally they were famous for giving directors a certain amount of money and total license.
Right.
And I don't know what they did with season 3, season 2, season 3. Did they try and rein a few things in? Did the execs get involved? Are they getting involved now? Is there less freedom that there, or was there too much freedom? And I don't know. Well, I don't know which way it's gone. I don't know if we'll ever know. But either way, if whatever the execs did for season 3, if they can do the opposite for season 4, we might be okay. But I don't think they should. And again, I don't think they should rush it. I know we've seen the trailer. Not even a trailer, but a clip, right? Yeah. I'd rather. I don't know if we were talking off air or on air about this, and I know it's not air, but I can't get out of my radio days for that. But I don't know whether I've lost my train of thought. What was I talking about?
With that little clip that they released?
Hope they don't rush.
Yes. So where was I? if I just start, then
like I saw the clip. Hope they don't rush.
If I start there, I saw that. So, in seeing the clip, I hope they don't rush into a June, July release, and they take a longer time to just get it right. They seem to be doing that. I forget what's the finance Breaking Bad? The accountants Breaking Bad? No, it's not a Saul. It's not a Breaking Bad spin-off or anything. But in my head, it's Jason Bateman is the star.
Ozark?
Ozark, right? Yeah. Everything just gets progressively worse, right?
Yeah.
That's got to come back soon for the third season, and they've taken a while to do that. Yeah. So they can do. Surely they should be able to do that.
Here's the thing. So I'll throw this out there. I want to say two things. First of which is the first two seasons of Stranger Things are, I think, evergreen and perennial. I think that they will stand alone as things that like our children will watch, and that their children will probably also watch as well. I think they are that good, and I think they will stand the test of time. My one worry, so the other path for this is, I think, like the Matrix path, and I have a very strong opinion about it. The first Matrix is like one of the greatest movies of all time. I think I can say that without argument.
Yeah, it's pretty brilliant.
More controversially, I cannot stand the second or third one. I have not watched them more than once. I was so...
They made them at the same time, didn't they?
The third, I've only seen once.
I fell asleep in the second.
Oh my God. So bad. But the first one was so... and it was so much different than anything we had ever seen before. Mm-hmm. And sure, it's got ideas, but nothing else looked and felt like that before or since, right? Except things that deliberately copy it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just how some level of genius works. Like,
you don't think Tron looked like it? No, I'm joking.
Well, no. Of course. And I like the first Tron, but I was like Tron. I love Tron.
But I think that's your example of how many years were they probably thinking through that in their brain?
Right.
Because every shot in that looks so well thought. And that's what I always said about the second and third one. They just seemed messy compared to the first one.
From what I've heard tonight, if in doubt, give your first draft to Jeremy.
Yeah,
that's right.
A second or third draft to Jeremy, and then he'll sort it out.
So the other thing I wanted to say, and this is something I just thought about when we were talking, I also think of Game of Thrones, which I haven't watched ever, but I read about it. I watched like 10 episodes, or I watched 10 minutes of one episode, and there was like gross violence and incest, and I was like, I'm not into this right now. Sorry, guys.
Not both at the same time.
Yeah, it's like it's like what because people are like, it's so good. I'm like, what is this? This is like
everyone else is just so weird, right?
Yeah. Anyway, but what I wanted to say was, I think, this is what I wanted to say. I think some of what was happening with The Walking Dead, and I think a lot of these shows that you can watch as a binge or can be released at a time, I think the people start off as writers. Because when you're writing the first episode of Stranger Things, or the first season, there is no show. You are creating that show and you're working on it with people. Once it begins to become popular, you then are managing a phenomena, which I think is a different kind of thing. If you look at J.K. Rowling's books, 1 through 4 are fantastic. The first movie comes out after the 4th book is done, and she writes the 5th one having seen her stuff as a movie, and it just goes, she's a great writer and they're okay, but it goes downhill. Probably 200 pages could have been cut out of book 5, and thinking about it as describing a movie that you would watch, it's not bad, but she's not a writer anymore. She's managing a media phenomenon. Yeah. And I think that's I would imagine that part of what I think execs or creatives would learn out of something like this is you can have writers that can put together 2 to 3 seasons of Walking Dead or 2 seasons of Stranger Things, but you need other people with you that are, regardless of their talents as writers, are good at managing the phenomenon itself. Because I think what those people need to do is look at the writers and say, and be their editors and say, oh, this is a great draft of season 3. We're not going to air this. You need to go. We'll give you another year, right?
Yeah, right.
We'll put you up in a cabin, but this does not meet the quality of the second thing. And I think that there needs to be a flexibility in the production studios to allow that to happen. And also, and part of my part of it too is we as an audience need to be forgiving of people, because I not trying to toot my own horn, but I generally say I don't care when the next stuff comes out. I want it to be good. Like, I'll wait 2 years. I mean, we waited freaking 20 years for new Star Wars. I will happily wait. Because the things that I like, I watch them a lot. And in the shows that I show my kids are things that I've seen many, many times. I am happy to wait for it, and I think that the production schedule and demand of the phenomena of Stranger Things decreases the artistic quality of what we see in season 3.
So, handling the phenomena, do you then get a bigger boy in, or a bigger girl in, regarding the director or the writers?
I mean, I think like so. Just excuse me for this reference sideways, but so Noelle Stevenson, who I really like a lot, is the showrunner for She-Ra and the Princess of Power, and it's a great show. Noelle Stevenson, she's a graphic artist. She does the Lumberjane. She also did this fantastic graphic novel called Nimona, which they optioned and they're going to be doing a movie, I think, in the next year. She's young. I like her a lot. I just read her memoir called, I think, The Fire Burns On or something. It's fantastic. My point is, when they put together that show, they had writers, directors, and a showrunner, and some other showrunners as well, managing the whole bit of it. And I think that it was really taxing on her. She talks a lot about it in her memoir. But I think that part of the reason why that show is successful over time, and also something like Voltron as well, where you have they're kid shows and they're smaller bits, but you have someone whose specific job is to manage not just like the production of the content in any specific show, like season or episode, but is managing the release schedule and the creation schedule and how long. Because I mean, Voltron has variant levels, not every season has the same amount of episodes. Managing the expectations of the delivery mechanism based on the content. That I think that is something that I don't know. I think that that's one area that I saw was lacking in season 3, and I would hope that over time that person becomes like new, like it's almost like a new kind of role, because it's not a director, right? It's not someone who's in charge of the look and of it and look and sort of feel of it, but it's someone who's in charge of the larger media presence, relation, audience expectation, writer space of it, because
that's sort of the showrunner concept that's become popular,
right? And I think probably that like the writer-directors of Stranger Things are doing it for themselves.
Right. The showrunner is.
But there's probably also. I mean, I'm just speculating. There's probably also executives that say, "You're our flagship show. You're going to give us something in July, right?" And the other thing is, if you have, they have this thing. That was a really strange tone of voice. They have this thing where they synchronize like their show with the time of year. Mm-hmm. Like they have the Halloween thing in Halloween and the 4th of July thing in July. Yeah. I'm like, that is like signing your. That is guaranteeing that you're going to be done by a certain point. And like, I don't need it. I just like, as an audience member, like, it's cool, but like, I don't need it. I just want good story.
But right, so in the old days, didn't they shows, they didn't used to be finished when they went on air, right? That's true, obviously the one episode was.
Yeah, right.
So if they stamp their flag in the ground for Easter or Easter, probably not a good example. Halloween again, right? Or Christmas, and then they get the first 6 done. Maybe they should challenge themselves and just say, all right, let's get the first 6 done. We've got 2 more to do as we're rolling it out. So listen to what people are saying, and off we go. Because maybe that was part of that creative juices as well.
Because obviously
got people going.
They did the bottle episode with the other kids that had powers, and apparently there was a huge negative response to that coming out of season 2. And so I think that was a lot of like why they said like, we got to keep these pairs of the main group together, in the 3rd season, and see people just want that dynamic of this group of kids, and how the focus was getting them all back together in that.
It's a side quest. It's a side quest.
Yeah, everybody had side quests, even Winona Ryder and Hopper, right? Everybody had their little area. So I think they are probably listening, but I don't know. Kind of like we talked about Star Wars last episode, there was no overarching vision necessarily from the beginning, and from what I understand, they didn't know off bat. They thought it was a weird little show. At the very beginning of Stranger Things. They didn't know that it would have that sort of response. And I also heard that they thought it was going to be an anthology show, so season 2 would be a totally different story. And then they were like, "Oh no, we gotta stay with this." Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting things like that may be hard to gauge, but once you realize how popular it is, you need to manage your property, right?
Yeah,
manage expectations. I want to thank Jason for being on our show and being willing to talk to us for so long about Stranger Things 3 and lots of different third in the series of things, Oasis, Star Wars, all those pieces.
Yeah, they all link together.
Yeah, and bringing your perspective to it and stories. So thanks for listening to the episode, and we'll talk more next time.